Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel with your hosts Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone. Good to see you again, Mike.
Amen. Good to see you, brother.
Welcome everyone to our Truth Be Told YouTube page. We are up to session number 45. Just keeps climbing.
It does.
And so there are at least 45 pieces of evidence to use against us. We're really building a case for the prosecuting attorneys of the ministry out there, aren't we?
We most certainly are. Why are we doing that? And I think we're up to 40, is it 46 or 47 subscribers now?
Oh, are we?
I think so.
46 or 7. Yeah.
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 It's kind of like someone told me one time that they had been in the ministry a long time and had good Bible knowledge and everything. And I think I was talking to them about putting some things in writing, send it out.
Mm.
And he said, I don't put anything in writing to share with anyone, because he said, you learn the hard way, it comes back to bite you in the future.
Yeah.
Especially if they, take it out of context, or
Yes. Yeah.
can't express, a lot of emotions or intentions or anything in the printed word very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and he was honest, because we all do this. We get our hands on a book by a fellow minister about any particular subject. One of the things we do is we're scanning through it the first time, is finding the part we disagree with.
Yes.
And it may only be one paragraph on one page, but that's
Yes.
what we focus on.
Yeah. And it taints the whole book.
It taints the whole book. Now we do that with our brethren in the faith.
Yes.
But with Protestants, we do the opposite. We say, well, they might be a little bit off on the church, but everything else, they're just fine.
Right. Yeah. Go figure. Go figure.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that too.
So we give them a break.
Yeah.
And then we attack our own brethren.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, today is session number 45. Today is February the 9th, 2022. We were just discussing what I call the Boston Tea Party of our day, of the moment, which is up in Canada, the truckers.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is kind of a Boston Tea Party kind of a deal going on there. And we see now, of course, the Boston Tea Party, they caused some people to lose product and money and
Mm-hmm.
and everything by throwing that tea in the water. But these truckers are trying their best not to leave behind a mess. They're trying to follow the law. They're happy. They're orderly. They express their love for their country, and they seem firm in their resolve.
Yes.
And you got to admire a group. I think that's the perfect group to lead out in this protest, because truckers as a group, have a reputation of being just the type of people, just good, hardworking people who want to take care of their families, who love their country, who they're kind of the cowboys of the modern age. And they just have good hearts for the most part, except when I'm driving down the freeway and one of them decides he wants to pass 6 trucks in front of him going 1 mile an hour slower than him. And so he pulls over in front of me and takes 30 minutes to get past all those trucks. That doesn't make me real happy, but
No.
Otherwise, I've known a lot of truckers in my life, and most all of them are just good, down to earth people.
Yeah. And they all have crazy good truck stops, I'll tell you that. The food is really good.
Stick to your ribs kind of food.
Yes. Yeah.
The kind of food that growing up we thought was very healthful for us, because it filled you up and it stayed with you a long time.
Yes.
But, all that, now I eat a meal like that, if it's like fried chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy.
Yeah.
and that kind of meal now, I just feel yucky. I feel
Yeah.
lethargic.
Yeah.
I still eat it once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not near as often as I did growing up.
Yeah. Instead of sticking with you for a day, it's like more like a week.
So the government of Canada to me, is coming across really poorly.
Yeah.
Heavy-handed, and they're just they just say all the wrong things and do all the wrong things, and the truckers are coming across quite well. And of course, I tried to listen to the national Canadian news a few times, and they either ignored it or they purposely showed, empty streets, or maybe one or two trucks on a side street or something, and they're trying to make it sound like hardly, that it's fizzling.
Yeah.
And they're trying to say that they're desecrating the statues. And in this day and age of social media, they have some of those truckers have people with cameras on those monuments 24/7.
Yeah.
And they're nothing like that's going on. There's flowers being put there. Now the government has fenced those off, claiming to protect the monuments when the monuments weren't being harmed anyway. But so the optics of the government looks bad.
It
and
does.
The optics of the truckers look good.
I didn't know CNN had a branch up there in Canada. Because that's their style of reporting.
And looking at some of those videos, I've really been enjoying watching some of them. And just guys walking around with their phones, filming what's going on, talking to people. But seeing all that snow and ice. And I'm looking out my window today, and it's going to be about 75 degrees. The almond orchards are breaking out in their white blossoms. So in about a week, we'll just have oceans of white.
Oh, wow.
All up and down this Central Valley of California. We have just many, many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres of almond orchards. And when they bloom out, they're just beautiful.
And the fragrance too.
The fragrance, And of course, that's one of the, that's one of the scriptural crops to grow. Because almond blossoms are one of the items that God and Solomon, David designed in the structure of the temple.
Oh, yeah.
Was almond blossoms. So, and then right on the heels of that, just a week or two later, after the almonds are in full bloom, once they start to fade, they turn a pinkish color. And so that's really pretty too. And then the peaches start blooming out. We still have a lot of peach orchards here in the valley. And they're a small pink bloom. So they'll overlap just a little bit, and you'll drive around and just see an ocean of white and rivers of pink.
Nice.
It's beautiful.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's going to be, but it happens in the middle of February to the first week or two of March.
Wow.
And which is so early for most of the country, but that's California for you. There's still a few good things left about California. There are
a lot of good things. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're going, and you said you're having a heat wave there. You're up in the 40s today, yeah?
Yeah, we're 47, my computer says. And the snow has been melting. So
that's pretty warm for February, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. We're way above normal. Puddles everywhere as the snow that we had is melting. So at the base of my driveway is a big puddle. So, yeah.
I love to study history, and when you study history, you study a lot about battles and war. And until I got older, understood a little bit better about the weather and the climate and the geography around the world, how that, even the Bible talks about the season. It was the season for war.
Right.
And what that means in most of the world is that, it's snow or ice in the winter. And then they often get heavy rains in the spring with the melting snow and ice. So you can't move an army, especially with wagons and cannons and everything, Through it's easier actually to fight in the winter with ice and snow than it is in the spring with the mud.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
And so they would hold off fighting each other until like May, and that was even kind of early. So they'd fight through the summer, and depend on who made up the army or where it was, how close it was to your homeland, then you'd stop in time to go home and harvest the crops in the fall time.
All in a day's work.
So you like take care of your family and your farm for 6 months of the year, and then you go fight for 6 months of the year. What a life.
What a life. Yeah. Oh man.
So we're trying to get Israel out of Egypt, and we're just about there. We may make it today. I think we may. Are we going to get them across the Red Sea today?
We'll get them at least up to the Red Sea, if not over.
Up to the Red Sea. Okay.
We don't want to rush into anything,
I was thinking about what you said. You've said a couple of times in previous sessions about we both have talked about God's trying to reveal himself as Yahweh or Jehovah, his sacred name, the tetragrammaton, the 4 letters, usually YHWH. And you called him the God that breathes. And I like that because it's we may have brought this up before, but it's built into his name, isn't it?
It is.
Why you said that. You take, they added vowels later to make it pronounceable in English, Yahweh.
Yeah.
But it's just the 4 letters, YH and WH.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you try to say those 2 combinations, and that's is or Yah, depending on how you say it. Then Weh. So it's a breathing in and then a breathing out.
Yeah.
So he's a God that breathes, and even in his very name, you're inhaling and exhaling.
Yeah.
So then the extended idea of he's the God of life.
Yes,
He
absolutely.
said, I'm not the God of the dead, but of the living.
Yes.
And he's the giver of life.
Yes. Yeah.
And of course, the first thing we look for when a baby is born is start breathing on their own.
Yes.
And so the God that breathes is really a very accurate description of the true God.
And if you follow it up with,
and of course, that separates him from the idols.
Yeah.
They can't breathe.
Exactly.
They can't talk.
And so if you follow it up with the God that breathes and has breath, and with that breath, he breathed into man's nostrils. And so, I like that kind of that whole thing is the God that breathes and has breath. You're right, as opposed to the idols who had mouths, but they couldn't speak, obviously couldn't breathe either. But those were the idols that Israel was going after. Can you believe it?
Yes. Yeah. So we've dealt with the Passover, the death of the firstborn, God setting up his sacred annual calendar with the holy feast days. But God told them, like in chapter 12, verse 14 of Exodus, this day shall be to you a memorial. You shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. So they still keep it today. And the problem, of course, is the only way most Jews can keep the Passover today is only with the remembrance of Egypt and the deliverance. They can't, unfortunately, some of them can as believers, but they can't add the element God desired to be added, is the look forward to the Passover Lamb, Christ. And Christ is our Passover sacrifice for us. But they can't include that. And so for almost 4,000 years, 3,500 years, they've been observing the Passover annually. And so 3,500 times, or ever how many times total it is, did not include Christ. the Passover lamb.
Yeah. So what
That's
were
kind
they?
of sad to think
So
about.
what did it point to? I mean, really, to them, what was it pointing to? You know, it was just a hollow observance if it didn't point to something. You know.
Yes.
So and you're right.
And God wanted them to observe it basically the same time of year every year, the beginning of spring.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with that, of course, is they were on a lunar calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to add an extra month.
Mm-hmm.
I think it worked out to 7 out of 19 years. So almost 1/3 of the years, every 3 years or so, close to it, 7 out of 19, they had to add an extra month.
Mm-hmm.
Because these were harvest feast also,
Mm-hmm.
spring
Mm-hmm.
harvest, the first fruit harvest, the ending of winter harvest, the beginning of spring and summer harvest, and then Pentecost, of course, being in the middle of the harvest, and then the fall feast being the end of the fall harvest and the agricultural year. And so in order to keep those important feasts that speak about spiritual things and prophetic things, to keep their meaning, it was important to keep them at the same time of the year each
Mm-hmm.
year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if they kept having to add an extra month every 3 years or so
Mm-hmm.
to keep that in place. I mean, otherwise you'd be celebrating Passover in winter and fall in the summer.
Right.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
So
yeah, good point. Good point.
then another thing I wanted to mention before, I think you have some PowerPoint presentation to share with this, but I noticed in chapter 12, and you brought this up last week, chapter 12, verse 41, it came to pass at the end of the 430 years on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies, the old King James says hosts, but that particular word translated hosts or armies is the same word in verse 51. So it came to pass on that very same day that the Lord brought the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt according to their armies. So 41 and 51 is the same Hebrew word. And so we talked about it being military formation.
Mm-hmm.
One translation said they came out in fives,
Mm-hmm.
but some kind of efficient, organized
Yes.
procession
Mm-hmm.
that made the travel much more efficient
Mm-hmm.
as well. And you talked about how much time they had to get to Mount Sinai, and it was pretty
Mm-hmm.
far away.
Mm-hmm.
So you could, if you have people scattered around, you're just not going to travel near as quickly or efficiently. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to transfer orders or instructions or anything like that. But if you're in a pretty tight formation,
Mm-hmm.
then information can be disseminated much more quickly.
Yes.
And so it's just a really good method
Mm-hmm.
that God through Moses instructed them to travel by.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, that was also, as we talked about last week, Deuteronomy 6 and 7, God's education program that he built into their system of teaching their children by traveling in times of peace in this military formation. It was also training them, almost without them knowing it, to be prepared for the various battles they would have to engage in, both in the wilderness and in Canaan land.
Yeah.
So God was training them, even when they didn't realize it, for educating their children and for military purposes.
Yeah. He knew what was up ahead.
Yeah, he did. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts before you get into your presentation, and I'll just add my comments as I feel the unction to.
Yeah, please do. We're relying on that. Let me go ahead and share this.
I do want to tell our viewers while you're setting that up, I noticed in our last two sessions, 43 and 44, at least on my screen, our faces appear even during the presentation. But when I watched the playback on YouTube, they may have been missing all or part of the time. We're trying to work on that. And we're trying to work on our faces looking more zoomed in than what they appear to us right now. So we don't know if that's a matter of settings in Zoom or the transfer process to YouTube. But in case you were wondering about those things, probably no big deal to you. You may have not even noticed it because it's not you doing the recording. But when, when you're the one kind of in charge of it, you notice those kind of things.
Yeah, we're behind the scenes, and so we notice those things.
Okay, Mike, what you got?
Well, all right. So let's just see if this works. So this is after the death of the firstborn, and they're preparing to get out of the country. Free at last, let the journey begin. So it got to the point where the slaves were pretty much thrust out. They said, "Go, get out of here." And of course, Israel spoiled the Egyptians. They at that point were panicking, as we read Exodus 12:31 through 33. And Brother Rick, you want to grab that for us?
Yeah. And he called for Moses and Aaron by night and said, "Rise up and get you forth." I think we said last week, I doubt if those were the exact words he used. Probably something more dramatic and emotional, maybe even profane. But rise up and get you forth from among my people, both ye and the children of Israel, and go serve the Lord. Of course, that's the last thing you really wanted them to do. Yeah, I want you to go serve your God.
Yeah.
As ye have said. Also take your flocks and your herds, as ye have said, and be gone. And bless me also. And the Egyptians were urgent upon the people that they might send them out of the land in haste, for they said, "We be all dead men." And they were so urgent that they gladly gave them their gold and silver and jewels and all that stuff. So they paid them to leave. They did not pay them as slaves. Now they're paying them to leave.
I find that fascinating. God got what was due for his people. He collected where they couldn't. Okay, so one of the things that we might get to today, I'd like to anyway, is the route that they took. And you'll hear me pronounce it route at some times, and other times I'll pronounce it route. So I hope that doesn't bother anybody. So here's the land of Goshen, or the land of Ramses. And this is the western fork of the Red Sea, the Gulf of Suez, and off the picture is the Gulf of Aqaba. So we'll see that as we go along. So they left the day after Passover on Nisan 15. And here's this fork here. Okay, so they start up here, and we'll have other maps and such, but so they start up here. And I'll just quickly show the route they're going to take is across this way here, and they're going to drop down here, right about here. They head south, and they enter this one portion of I think the western leg of this wadi, and see this white spot right here. We'll look at that here in a little bit. That white spot is where they're heading, right? And over here is Midian, where God told Moses to bring the people back. So they're starting way over here. Okay. Just move along here a little bit. One thing I want to point out is how rugged this area is. It's not a flat, smooth desert like we think of deserts with the sand dunes and stuff. This is why they called it a wilderness. And this is why the Pharaoh could easily say that they are entrapped in this area, because these are deep canyons that they're walking through. So he's leading them with a cloudy pillar by day and a fiery pillar by night. And so, and they took their journey from Succoth and encamped in Etham in the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud and to lead them by the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. So he wanted them to make good time as they traveled across this area. All right, so here's another map.
So go back to that one again, Mike.
This one here, yeah.
Yeah, so remind us, so there's Goshen on the left.
Mm-hmm.
There's Canaan up in the top. The Mediterranean Sea, so the weather's nicer, closer to the water.
Mm-hmm.
It's flatter, closer to the water. Shorter, closer to the water. So why didn't God just take them right up the coastline and just prance right into Canaan land? Maybe about a month or so journey.
Yes, I think for two reasons. One is stated specifically, the other is, I guess, pretty much inferred. Actually, not, I'll take that back. It's pretty much stated as well. The first reason was that the Philistines were up here. This is the Gaza Strip today. Unless they see or become afraid, and these people war against them. But this isn't where God wanted them anyway. That wouldn't necessarily showcase his power of what he had in mind for the Egyptians. And so he purposely took them down here to cross over water, did everything in the manner in which he did, so that he would get the honor over Pharaoh and the Egyptians. So that was the other stated purpose. He would be getting his honor because he's showcasing his power. This battle,
interesting, isn't it? It's interesting looking at that map.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a topography map, so you don't know where all the mountains and hills and valleys and all that are. But just by look at that map, it seems like it would have been fairly easy to go around that body of water and down to Mount Sinai instead of across the water.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you suppose about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here again, I think it could have gone up and over like this, I suppose. But because of what he had in mind and what he wanted to do, this would be a more dramatic and a punctuation of his supreme power. And I think this is what the end goal in this whole event, in liberating his people, to have a high dramatic fashion of their exit in a way that they would be talking about for generations. And so that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree. And I might add a couple more things to that.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, our beloved brother, Jim Burks, now departed with the Lord, longtime pastor of the Citrus Heights Church. He used to call Israel a miniature world, that God's purpose for the world was being manifested through the nation of Israel. And thus, the pattern that God wanted for the world, especially as we get into New Testament times, was blood first and then through the water. And Paul deals with that in 1 Corinthians 10. They were baptized unto Moses in the Red Sea. So because a pattern was being developed for the world to follow of applying the blood to the door of your heart by faith, the sacrificed lamb, the Lamb of God, innocent blood, and then you head straight for the water. And you go through the water, come out the other side, and then you start your journey to the promises of God. So that's one, I think, important reason, is for the types and shadows that God was trying to develop to be followed thereafter until he returns. But the other, when you kind of alluded to this, we mentioned it before, God wanted to take his revenge, you might say, or his judgment on Egypt by the same method they tried to destroy Israel, by use of water. And so God wanted to use the same method. Pharaoh's command was to drown the boys in the water, and Moses was saved by water. The very water of death became a water of life for baby Moses.
Mm-hmm.
And then God said, okay, that's the means you want to destroy my people, then that's the means I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to drown you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, so just looking at a map, you might question why they have to go through the water, but those are several, I think, big reasons why.
Excellent. Yes. Excellent thoughts. So we'll go back to Egypt for just a moment. So Amenhotep III and his priests have been assessing the overall damages. Yahweh had virtually destroyed that nation. But while in the midst of mourning their dead, the people try to put their nation back together after the worst catastrophe in their history. It says here in Numbers 33, for the Egyptians buried all their firstborn, which the Lord had smitten upon them. Upon their gods also the Lord executed judgments. And so Pharaoh holds the lifeless body of King Tut, his firstborn. His dreams of his son becoming the next Pharaoh are shattered. But then, meanwhile, the scouts have reported back to Pharaoh that the Hebrew slaves are fleeing across the wilderness and are not returning. So now he now laments having let his slaves go free and decides to chase after them. And I think we talked about this in an earlier session, that there would need to be something that would fuel this rage. And so, in other words, he would have to actually chase after, want to go after them. And so they told the king of Egypt that the people fled, the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So his grief-stricken heart was then immediately turned into rage and fury. He now sought revenge. He would bury his son, but not before he returned with the Hebrew slaves. So you like that little graphic right there?
Yeah.
Now he's mad. He's mad. He's really mad now. So, all right, harness the horses, make ready my chariots. We're going after the slaves.
I did see one little comment by someone, a commentator, I think. He commented on the verse that says Pharaoh harnessed his chariot. And his thought was that he was so angry and in such a hurry that he didn't even wait for his servants to harness his own chariot. He did it himself. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that kind of adds to the picture of how the rush he was in.
The drama and the rage. Yeah, I'll do it myself. Yeah. So I will harden Pharaoh's heart that he shall follow after them, and I will be honored upon Pharaoh and upon all his hosts, that the Egyptians may know that I am Yahweh. All right. The Exodus, they went that away. So now we're going to look at the route, a proposed route. There's others that have different routes, but I'm pretty much settled on this one that we'll be looking at. The traditional route is to cross over right about here and come down to this traditional location of Mount Sinai. Okay. I think with the information that we now have available, that's been uncovered through expeditions and research and robotic instruments under the Red Sea and all of that, in my mind, this traditional location is pretty much debunked. So what we're going to see as we go along is this, what's traditionally considered Mount Sinai, is actually over here, Jabal el-Laz. That's the real Mount Sinai over here. And this is Midian, where God told Moses to return back to the mountain of God. So, all right. So,
By the way, my own studies reached that same conclusion, and we studied this independently.
Yes, yes. And I would just like to encourage our viewers. There is so much information out there that Brother Rick and I have, he said independently, have come across a lot of the same videos. People who actually are in this area right here. They've actually gone over here and are videotaping their findings. And so all of this is available. You can, if you want some, pointers or tips on where you can find this information, then just put it in the YouTube channel. So this is the traditional route. Okay, this is the route that I'll be proposing today. Okay, growing number of scholars who are taking a look at this possibility. It's been gaining popularity over the past 25 years or so. They're piecing together a lot of information now that they're finding. So now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So when Moses left Egypt, he landed in the land of Midian. So no doubt he went this way. He went over here, across this way. So these are some established trade routes and such. And while he was in the land of Midian, he married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, who was a priest of Midian, and he kept his flocks. And so we ask ourselves, well, where was this burning bush, that contact that he had with God, where God told him to go back into Egypt? Well, it was there on the mountain of God in Midian. And he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. So this was while Moses was still in Midian that God made this first contact with him. Horeb, the mountain of God. And he said, certainly I will be with thee, and this shall be a token unto thee that I have sent thee. When thou hast brought forth the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God upon this mountain. And so he was still in Midian, the mountain of God, when God told him this. So that's why Moses went back to Midian. He didn't go down here and in this area. He went to Midian. So Mount Horeb is just another older name for Mount Sinai. And after Israel arrived, it was referred to as Mount Sinai. And even Paul referenced the fact that Sinai is in Arabia. This is also Saudi Arabia, today's Saudi Arabia. So now we know that it's Midian where God wanted Moses to lead the Hebrews. So let's take a brief look at the route God led his people upon their leaving Egypt. Leaving Succoth, Israel journeyed across the wilderness to Etham. The proposed route was Goshen, Ramses or Goshen, to Succoth, got Joseph's bones, and then over to Etham. And from Etham, they would head down southward. And of course, they didn't do a straight shot. That's just for just for the slide purposes. But there was some ravines and stuff and rough, rugged area they had to walk across here as well. And then they come to Etham, and head down southward. And notice I have this circled, this little white spot right here. That's where they're heading. Pi Hahiroth, the mouth of the water. Also known as Nueva Beach. So this is what it looks like from a satellite view. See how twisty and windy this is? We're going to see more of this as it pours out into Nueva Beach. So they're called a water or it's a canyon where waters flow down. It's a big channel and it pours out onto the beach here. So it's an 18-mile or so canyon surrounded by rugged mountains and cliffs and leads to the Gulf of Aqaba. So now here on the ground level, you're in this canyon. So now from this view, we're going to go down inside the canyon. And Brother Rick, I'm sure you've seen a lot of these photos already. See how high this there was no escape. Once the Pharaoh was alerted as to their not returning, and he sent his chariots, there was, once they got into this canyon, there's really no escape, especially when they poured out onto the beach. So here's another view. You're almost there. This is the beach, and on the other side is where they want to go. So notice this is probably why the formation that they were in probably served as an advantage as well, because some of these areas were fairly narrow. Yeah, so they're going.
Yeah, that could easily, if you're not organized in formation, that could easily create a bottleneck.
Uh-huh. And you don't want people panicking either. So, which I'm sure they did panic somewhat.
I mean, they were in a rush because word may have gotten to them that the Egyptians were after them, or even if they didn't know it yet, they were still close enough to Egypt. They knew how mighty their army was. They would, as you said, they would be in a hurry to get as far away as possible, as quickly as possible.
Yes.
So you traveled through some of those narrow pathways with, if they were in fact 2.5 to 3 million people, you could easily clog up everything, and panic would set in, and people would trample each other. And
with their flocks and their herds. So it wasn't even just people. It was, I mean, they had to move along some livestock. Probably some unruly livestock at some times, you know. So here's a view of the beach. It's about a 15 square mile sandy beach. And this is what they traversed through.
15 square miles. Of course, we don't know what size it was, 3,500 years ago.
Right. It's probably expanded now.
So I wonder if, based on its size, you could kind of figure out the maximum number of people, because as you said, they also had animals, and they had cargo of different types. How many people could fit in that large of an area?
Yes.
It'd just be a kind of an interesting exercise. Someone listening to this may do that for us and notify us, so we can include it in a future session.
I had one resource who took the time to calculate as best as he could the rate of travel, how many kilometers or miles they would need to travel to get here within a certain amount of time. And then he had the elevation. So at different points along the way, what was the elevation that they were traveling in? This here is a downward slope overall. They're now heading downward. But there was some areas that they were traveling upward as they left Egypt. So here's an aerial view of Wadi Watir, or the Nueva Beach. Just another side view. Notice this and this. There was no escaping. There was only one way out. And that's why Moses had to tell them, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, because by now they are panicking as their rear scouts, as it were seeing the chariots coming.
That would even make that previous slide. No, the next one. you see that narrow pathway that leads onto the beach, and you showed how windy it is and everything. It magnifies the use of the pillar of God to block the way between Israel and Egypt.
Yes.
So, if it was just big open desert land like we normally think of, you think, well, Pharaoh was so angry and set on vengeance that he wouldn't let a thing like that stop him. He would just figure I'd just go ahead and march through it. But if you're in this dark, narrow pathway and that pillar is in your way, then it becomes very dangerous for you to attempt to move forward.
Yeah, if you're
on was using not just the pillar, but he was using the geography to protect Israel.
Yes, yeah. If you're out on a flat, sandy area, he would just split his troops up. Half of you would go this way, and half of you would go that. Would just go around this thing, But he couldn't go around it.
Yeah.
We're also going to show a picture of where they've discovered a portion of this beach has the sand and rocks are melted. Extreme heat has melted them. So here's Nueva Beach, and here's the crossing point. And I'm trying to think. I don't remember if 8 miles was I think I read a couple different numbers. So maybe you remember, Rick. I have 8 miles here. It may be that.
Sounds about right.
So here's the pillar of fire. This is what he used. Of course, we know God was in that pillar of fire, making his presence known.
Well, and another thing with that picture, I think really shows it well. That pillar then means that the Egyptian army did not know that narrow path was getting ready to open up into a wide, flat area again, or else maybe they would have attempted, God could have stopped them, of course, but they might have attempted to go through it. But from their vantage point, as far as they knew, this narrow, windy, difficult path for an army to rush through may have just continued for a while.
Yeah, I don't know if just in their history, how much they, scouted out through all these wadis, and whether they knew of this beach or not, I don't know. But God purposely led them through this winding path. And then these people are now, and their flocks are all deposited out here. And God is, and I don't know if it was right here, maybe it could have been further back if the people needed a little bit more room back here. But nonetheless, there was no way for Pharaoh to get up and go around this thing.
Yeah. If you're going to get to them, you're going to go through me.
That's exactly right. So here's this area here, I believe. You can see it's kind of shiny. So he put the camera right on it in this one video I was watching. And you can see the rocks and sand are melted. They're all melted together. And that would be from extreme heat. So there's just a lot of evidence now that people are able to get into this area and see it for themselves. That's been there all this time. But with the absence of this information, then people stuck with the traditional location because there was no evidence to contradict it. Now there's a lot of evidence to contradict it now. So his army advances, and Moses received a report from the rear guard that Pharaoh's armies have entered the canyon and fast approaching with a very large army of chariots. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. So I wonder sometimes, when we look at our own lives, the Lord allows us to get into situations that there's only one way, and that's to look up. And this clearly was their situation, but I mean, how many times have we had the same feeling, you know, a little bit of panic maybe, and we don't know there's a way out, but other than looking up and crying out to God. All they could do now was to believe. So again, some more artists. I discovered a bit of information that I'm going to throw out there to our viewers. I had never considered this before, but the words that are used to describe these walls of water seem to indicate that they were not just still water just being held up, but that when God blew the wind across that water, he actually froze the water, and so that the walls were actually turned to ice. Had you ever heard of that, Rick?
No. That sounds interesting, though.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. And so they stood up as a heap. And so I don't know, maybe our viewers have come across that information, but that was news to me. But it is interesting. So what some of the explorers that have gone into this area also discovered was that, so here would be Nueva Beach. So they're coming from this direction. That the water is standing up on the edges of this underwater land bridge. And it's like 1,000 feet on either side. And so it drops off considerably, but it was wide enough to allow these people to walk on dry ground.
Mike, I was just looking ahead a little bit in the Song of Moses in chapter 15. In verse 8, it uses, at the end of verse 8, it says, the floods stood upright like a heap, and the depths congealed. And a footnote says that word, Hebrew word, or English word congealed, literally means in the Hebrew, they became firm.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe where that writer got the idea of God turned it into something solid. It does call it a wall in 1422.
Mm-hmm.
I've always just pictured it as remaining fluid or liquid.
I've always pictured that myself. Yeah, that's how I pictured it.
It wasn't a strong wind that caused it.
Mm-hmm.
And depending how cold that wind was,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah, yeah. We know that when liquid congeals, it becomes hardened or ice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that's the English word. You're right. You'd have to go back into the original Hebrew. So there's this bridge. So this is pretty much dry ground with walls of water on either side. So this is an artist's conception. But here's the sandy beach. And as God, with the east wind blowing the water back, opened up to dry ground.
Mike, I just looked a little further in Strong's Concordance of 15:8, where it talks about the water congealed. And the Hebrew word means to thicken or to condense.
Mm.
So condense is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I was just surprised by that. I had never heard of that, but we're just throwing that out there for our viewers to maybe follow up on. So the cloud pillar that moved to the rear of the Hebrews, stationed now between Israel and the Egyptian army, and Pharaoh cannot advance his troops. So Yahweh is rescuing his people. And then the cloud moved out of the way, allowing Pharaoh and the soldiers to advance across the land bridge in pursuit of the Israelites. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them to the midst of the sea, even all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. It came to pass that in the morning watch, the Lord looked into the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of the fire and the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians, and took off their chariot wheels, that they drave them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fighteth for them against the Egyptians." So he took off their chariot wheels, so he broke their chariot wheels. Well, interestingly, when divers have gone down off of Nuweiba Beach, down in the water, and across this Red Sea, they find these strange formations of coral that you wouldn't normally see in coral. And they found chariot wheels with the axles sticking up, and coral has covered over all of this. And they found bones also. So this is the new evidence that I referenced that is now showing up in these last days. And the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen and all the host of Pharaoh that came into the sea after them they remained not so much as one of them.
So if we kind of continue this larger theme that God uses Israel as kind of a parable or kind of a picture lesson of what he wants for the principles, what he wants for the whole world. We mentioned that first you apply the blood by faith, you escape death, and then you go straight to the water and through the water. Of course, the pillar of cloud was above them and the water on both sides. So a picture of complete immersion. And even though it was on dry ground, it pictured of being enveloped by water.
Yes.
So then the picture for us today that we hold to is that baptism for one who has applied the blood is extremely important to continue the journey. But baptism for one who has not applied the blood is a false hope and death. It's destruction. If your hope is in your baptism and you haven't applied the blood, then God's judgment is on you. So I think that's an important principle we can get from this also.
Absolutely. Without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. All right, so here's one of those chariot wheels with the axle sticking up that was broken off by God. This is on the Arabian side of the Gulf of Aqaba. So this would be across the Red Sea. This is an interesting fact also, that apparently Solomon, 400 years or so after this, wanted to commemorate the crossing site. And so he ordered 2 pillars to be constructed and positioned on either side of the Red Sea, where they came from Egypt and then over to Midian, the Arabian side.
It makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, Israel, they were very good record keepers of events and people and dates and everything. And certainly in David and Solomon's day, they would have known the exact spot.
Yes. Yeah. So here's, I believe, Ron Wyatt standing at the base of the one column. The one was toppled over, and the water had eroded a lot of the words that were engraved in it. But on the other side, those words were still intact. And so the matching column read Pharaoh, Misraim, which we know is Egypt, Death, Edom, Yahweh, Solomon. So from that, they just figured that it was Solomon that had these built, because he had his ships. His ships came down this sea. So he had a navy that patrolled this area.
Mike, I'm going to step out for just about 30 seconds. I'm going to put myself on mute, so you just keep on going.
Okay. So now Egypt would need a new pharaoh. History records that the pharaoh whom Yahweh drowned in the sea, Amenhotep III, had two wives, a royal Egyptian with whom he had Tutankhamun, a foreign wife with whom he had Akhenaten. I can't pronounce these words. After Pharaoh's death in the Red Sea, these two wives struggled for power over Egypt. Pharaoh favored his foreign wife over his first royal wife and elevated her to his primary queen over Egypt. However, it is believed by some that it was the royal wife, in a desperate attempt to secure her late husband's throne, corresponded with the king of the Hittites, a newly rising power in the area. As one might expect, panic and fear began to overtake the royal wife. If word of this got out, Egypt would be invaded by her enemies. The details of what has happened to Egypt's emperor and their army must be kept secret. But now recall that Thutmose III, Moses' replacement, had spent his reign securing Egypt as a world power. Other nations feared and respected Egypt and the Egyptian army. They all brought their tribute to her so that Egypt lacked nothing in material wealth. If what had happened to Egypt's pharaoh and his army leaked out, they would be a sitting duck to invading armies from her neighbors. Brother Rick, you and I talked about this, rewriting history.
Yes.
For the sake of saving face.
A lot of history has been erased simply because you don't want to make yourself look bad. So you record all your victories and you don't record your defeats.
Yes.
Or your defeats are recorded by somebody else.
Right.
Won the battle.
Yeah.
They say history is written by the winners of the battles.
By the winners. Yep.
By the victors.
So our viewers can look more into this if they'd like.
Egypt's Watergate.
Yeah, I'm calling it their Watergate, but they were trying to hide. They were trying to conceal. So the letter
is interesting at the end of this chapter 14. Where it says Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. So that's where we mentioned last time that if their bodies washed up, then that means a lot of their weapons washed up too.
Yeah.
So they got to quote borrow from the Egyptians once again.
Yes.
The two-phase borrowing, huh? First the gold and silver and jewelry, now the weapons.
This is interest. So this is more of the history that followed in terms of the internal cleanup, or what's another word I want? I can't think of it now. in the aftermath of the destruction of their nation that was taking place. All right, I'm just going to kind of more or less skip through this. If any of our viewers want this PowerPoint, I'm more than happy to send it to you.
It's a good one, Mike. You do a good job on it and a lot of good information. So it hope some might ask you for it, present it to their own church.
Oh, damage control. That's what I was trying to think of. So Egypt was in the mode of damage control. So now let's go back to Moses. The refugees, as it were, they're now safely on the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba in the land of Midian, where God had told Moses to bring them to the mountain of God. So now they're sitting over here, in this area. So with Egypt behind them, God is now leading the Hebrews through the deserts of Midian in Arabia. There is more training for the Hebrews to undergo before they arrive at Mount Sinai. Thus, Israel travels for 3 months before arriving at the mountain of God. Moses and the children of Israel are now safely near the side of the Gulf of Aqaba in the land of Midian, where God had told Moses to bring them to the mountain of God. So here's the real Mount Sinai. This is where it's located, right there. Jebel al-Laz. Having crossed over the Red Sea into the land of Midian, Moses and the Hebrews found themselves in the wilderness of Shur. You recall that pillar that was discovered and shown to the Arabian authorities? This is Ron White who had shown it to them. The column was removed by local authorities and replaced by this marker. Using Google Earth, we can zoom in and locate the palm trees mentioned in Exodus 15:27, all grouped together in the wadi. Here they are. And I actually,
I might just say we'll get into this in future sessions, especially when we get to chapter 19, when they're at Mount Sinai. But you mentioned in an earlier slide they traveled 3 months to get from Egypt to Mount Sinai. My calculation, it was actually just 50 days or 47 days or something like that. So I'll explain that. But they probably arrived Mount Sinai at the beginning of the 3rd month, and they had left Egypt in the middle of the 1st month. So that would be, I connect it to the giving of the law to Pentecost.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
To Pentecost. And Jewish tradition says that too, that the law was given on Pentecost, but it seems to be borne out by the language as well. I don't want to just dispute you, but it's easy to read in chapter 19. They got there in the 3rd month. So you think, okay, it's the 3rd month, it's 3 months, but they got there in the start of the 3rd month and left in the middle of the 1st. It'd just be, like 50 days maybe.
I see. Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Okay.
And I've watched another video that focused on or included these palms. It's just fascinating. All this is right there as it shows up in the Bible. It's all right there. Real life, real time. They came to Elim where there were 12 wells of water. I saw those as well. And 70 palm trees. And they encamped there by the waters.
I might just say a word about that. That previous slide. Kind of interesting, 12 wells of water and 70 palm trees. So, of course, 12 would represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And Jewish tradition says that there were 70 Gentile nations. So the palm trees would represent the Gentile nations, and the 12 Israel. And Israel was supposed to be the water of life to those 70 pagan Gentile nations. those palm trees were dependent upon those 12 wells. So this thing is kind of interesting that, there's a reason why God chose 12 for the wells and 70 for the palm trees. That kind of fits that.
It does. Yeah.
Source of spiritual water to the nations.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it.
So next session, I have some notes regarding the Song of Moses in chapter 15 I may deal with.
Okay.
But I also wanted to say that last verse of chapter 14, I've referred to a few times as one of my favorite baptism verses, describing what we're supposed to feel and sense at a baptism service, both the person being baptized and the church witnessing it. Israel saw the great work which the Lord had done in Egypt. So, we rejoice in a person's testimony of faith, and we celebrate it at their baptism. We celebrate their previous testimony. I guess I should say it correctly so that no one puts words in my mouth. But and we celebrate the power of God that He did for them while they were in Egypt when they applied the blood by faith. And so the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord in His servant Moses. And that's a really good description of how we're supposed to feel about it. But so the question is then, once they saw the Egyptian armies dead and the Red Sea closed, so they were officially rescued from Egypt and safe, at least for the moment. So it had to be a powerful feeling of the goodness of God, the power of God, the sense of our destiny can finally be realized. We're headed toward our promised land. We're free. I mean, the emotions had to be overwhelming at that point. Unfortunately, after we get past chapter 15 in the Song of Moses, we get into chapter 16, and 3 days later, they had no water, and they said, "Did you bring us out here to die?" So we find out just 3 days after this high point, they hit their first low point. I often tell people that one of the most dangerous times in our Christian life is after a great victory, because we have a tendency to let down. And that's when Satan, and he doesn't like that we had a victory, so he doubles his attack. We let our guard down. And often our time of defeat is closely connected to a time of victory. And theirs was just 3 days.
Yes.
And but it also shows that this wonderful group of people in our minds stood on that far shore and saw what God had done. And they feared Him and they rejoiced. But 3 days later is kind of when we find out why that generation could not go into the promised land. Because this was a recurring sin, their lack of faith, their grumbling, their lack of obedience to the trust in God and Moses. It only took 3 days for us to discover why they weren't going to make it.
Yeah, that's amazing. The devil knows when to strike. The euphoria of that day, as it waned, you waited 3 days, and they began to grumble. Well, should we?
We don't want to get a place to stop. Did you have a few more slides on this?
Yeah, I don't want to really take us to Sinai yet.
Okay, no, let's not get to Sinai yet.
Okay.
This always humored me as a young boy. Anytime I'd come across the wilderness of sin. And he doesn't mean sin like the rest of the Bible means sin, although they did sin in the wilderness of sin.
Yeah.
They lived up to the name.
They did live up to the name. Yes.
Yeah, that was always kind of funny to me as a kid.
This is just some topographical.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we don't want to get that far.
Split rock.
A split
We
rock.
don't want to get that far yet.
Yeah.
So let's start in chapter 15. We finally got them out of Egypt and across the Red Sea. Remember that old joke, that some people try to call it the Reed Sea, and maybe literally it is the Reed Sea. It doesn't mean it's shallow, but reeds on the banks and everything.
Right. Yeah.
So it could be called the Reed Sea and still be deep. But this fella one time said my boy was taught at school that they didn't cross a deep body of water. They crossed just a marsh called the Reed Sea, and it was just a few inches deep. And so told his parents, and the dad or mom said, well, that's even more amazing, isn't it? That God could drown the whole army in a few inches of water.
Nice. Yeah, well played. Well played.
Yeah. That's even more impressive.
That is, yes, it is. Yes. Yeah. That person was not going to get cornered. Nice.
So thanks for your time, Mike. And
yes,
good. I enjoyed your PowerPoint presentation.
Yes. And I'm growing in this too, because as more information is uncovered, and I've even added more to this, but changed some slides even before going in our video today, because it's just kind of an ever growing thing. So by the time the Lord returns, this might be revision 100 when it's all said and done.
Oh, I've had revisions like that where I finally just have to reach a stopping point and say, it's probably still not where I want it to be, but I've worked on it and I've changed it enough. I've added and taken away stuff enough.
Yeah. You got to move on at some point. But I would encourage our viewers to do some research. The information is that we're presenting here, and a lot of it that we're not presenting here is out there. Just go online and just look it up. There's organizations and individuals who have invested a lot of time and money to bring this information to us, to the world, which I really appreciate, because I don't plan on going over there anytime soon. And so I appreciate them going over there with their cameras and their equipment at their expense and uncovering this information for the rest of us. So any other thoughts, brother, before we?
No, as I tell people who, they say, at your age, and you've been a minister most of your whole life, and you've preached about these places, hundreds of times, and you've never gone over to the Holy Land on a trip. And I usually say something smart aleck like, I'm waiting for the free trip by the guy who made it, by the one who created it in the first place, who knows where all the correct places are instead of where the Catholic shrines are.
Yes.
Every important spot.
I say the same thing. I'm waiting for the free trip. So, well, thank you everyone for
the best tour guide possible.
Yes. Let me stop the share. Yeah, that'll be the best tour guide, and no biases, just the real deal.
Anyway, thanks everyone for watching this. And
thanks everybody.